It was one of those cold, rainy nights in Chicago that made you want to stay indoors with a warm blanket and a cup of tea. The kind of night where the streets were slick with rainwater reflecting the dim glow of streetlights, and the wind howled, like it had something important to say but no one was listening. Maya, a 34-year-old nurse who worked long shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, was finally done for the day. She was tired. Her feet ached, her mind was foggy from exhaustion. But she knew she needed to eat before heading home. Maya wasn't picky about food. She just wanted something comforting after a grueling shift. So she decided to stop by the Cozy Corner, a small diner tucked away on a quiet street. It was her favorite spot, not too fancy, not too crowded, and always serving up hearty meals. That felt like a hug on a plate. As she approached the entrance, pulling her coat tighter against the biting wind, something caught her eye. There was a man standing outside the diner, drenched from head to toe. His hair clung to his forehead, water dripping down his face. He looked defeated, shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. Maya paused for a second, watching him through the glass window of the restaurant. Inside, she saw the hostess shake her head firmly while pointing toward the door. Whatever the hostess said, Maya couldn't hear it over the sound of the rain, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. This man wasn't welcome here. Her heart sank. She'd seen this kind of thing before. People judged based on appearances, rather than their character. But tonight something stirred inside her. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or maybe it was the fact that she had spent her entire shift caring for people who often felt invisible. Whatever it was, Maya felt a pull, a nudge telling her to step in. She opened the door and stepped back out into the rain. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the storm. The man turned around slowly, surprised to see someone calling out to him. There was a flicker of hope in his eyes, quickly replaced by resignation. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, her tone gentle yet firm. She moved closer, shielding herself from the rain under the awning of the diner. Up close, she could see he wasn't as old as she initially thought. Maybe mid-30s, though life seemed to have weathered him beyond his years. His clothes weren't dirty exactly, but they were worn, and his shoes looked like they'd seen better days. He hesitated before answering. "I'm fine," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. After a moment, he added, "They won't let me in." Maya frowned. "Why not?" "They said I didn't look presentable enough," he admitted, his voice tinged with bitterness. He glanced down at himself as if suddenly hyper-aware of his appearance. "Guess I don't fit the vibe of the place." For a brief moment, anger flared inside Maya. How dare they turn someone away because of how they looked? This wasn't some five-star restaurant. It was a humble diner, the kind of place where anyone should feel welcome. But instead of letting her frustration show, she softened her expression. "Come on," she said, motioning toward the door. "Let's get you out of the rain." The man hesitated again, clearly unsure whether to trust her. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know I don't," Maya replied with a small smile. "But I want to." After a long pause, he nodded reluctantly. Together, they walked back into the diner, ignoring the curious glances from the staff. Maya led him to a corner booth, far enough away from prying eyes but close enough to feel cozy. Once they were seated, she flagged down a waiter and ordered 2 steaming bowls of soup and some bread. "This is on me," she told him when he started to protest. "Just enjoy it." As the food arrived, the man introduced himself. His name was Daniel, and he was a writer, or at least he used to be. Lately, things hadn't been going well for him. He'd lost his job, then his apartment, and now he was struggling to find steady work. Tonight, desperate for warmth and a meal, he'd tried to grab dinner at the diner but got turned away instead. Maya listened intently, nodding along as he spoke. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, she simply gave him space to talk, to unload the burdens he'd been carrying silently. And as they sat there sharing stories and laughter between bites of soup, something remarkable happened. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt seen. Not as a failure, not as someone unworthy. but as a human being deserving of kindness. By the end of the meal, the atmosphere had shifted. The rain outside still poured relentlessly, but inside the little booth there was a warmth neither of them had expected. Before they parted ways, Maya handed him a napkin with her phone number scribbled on it. "If you ever need anything, or even if you just want to talk, call me," she said sincerely. Daniel took the napkin, gratitude shining in his eyes. Little did either of them know, this simple act of compassion would set off a chain of events neither could have predicted. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel found himself thinking about that rainy night more often than he expected. It wasn't just the meal or the warmth of the diner. It was the way Maya had treated him like a person, not a problem. She hadn't judged him for his appearance or asked intrusive questions about why he was struggling. Instead, she'd offered kindness, without expecting anything in return. That kind of generosity was rare these days, and it stayed with him long after their paths had parted. But life didn't magically get easier for Daniel overnight. He was still living paycheck to paycheck, taking odd jobs whenever he could find them, delivering groceries, cleaning offices, even doing yard work for strangers. Some nights he slept on friends' couches. Other nights he curled up in his car, staring at the ceiling as rain pattered against the windows. Yet amidst all the uncertainty, there was one thing that kept him going: writing. Even when everything else felt out of control, putting pen to paper gave him a sense of purpose. One chilly afternoon, while sitting in a park trying to gather his thoughts, Daniel pulled out his notebook. He flipped through the pages filled with scribbles, half-finished stories, and random ideas jotted down during moments of inspiration. Then he paused on a blank page. For some reason, his mind drifted back to Maya, the way she'd stepped outside, into the rain, the calmness in her voice, the genuine concern in her eyes. Without realizing it, he began to write. At first, it was just fragments, a description of her curly hair dampened by the rain, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the quiet strength she carried herself with. But soon, those fragments grew into something bigger. Daniel started weaving together the story of that night, not just what happened, but how it made him feel. He wrote about the weight of rejection, the sting of being dismissed because of how you look, and then the overwhelming relief of being accepted despite it all. By the time he stopped writing, hours had passed, and his fingers were stiff from gripping the pen so tightly. For the first time in months, Daniel felt hopeful. Maybe this story, the raw, honest account of his struggles and the unexpected kindness he'd received, was worth sharing. Maybe someone else out there needed to hear it, needed to know they weren't alone. With renewed determination, he polished the piece and sent it off to a few online literary magazines. To his surprise, one of them accepted it within weeks. The editor praised his vulnerability and encouraged him to keep writing. Encouraged by the response, Daniel decided to take a leap of faith. He started working on a full-length novel inspired by his own experiences. It wasn't easy. There were days when self-doubt crept in, whispering cruel reminders of his failures. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought of Maya. Her belief in him, however brief their encounter had been, became the fuel he needed to push forward. Meanwhile, Maya went about her daily routine, unaware of the impact she'd had on Daniel's life. She worked long shifts at the hospital, cared for patients who were often scared and vulnerable, and tried to make ends meet like everyone else. But she never forgot about him either. Occasionally, she'd wonder how he was doing, hoping he'd managed to turn things around. When she saw his number flash across her phone screen one evening, she answered immediately, her heart skipping a beat. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. "It's me. From the diner." Maya smiled, recognizing his tone instantly. "Of course I remember you. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," he replied, hesitating before continuing. "Actually, I wanted to thank you again for that night. You have no idea how much it meant to me." "You don't have to thank me," Maya said warmly. "I'm just glad I could help." "Well, there's more to it now," Daniel admitted. "I've been writing a lot, and I think some of it might actually be good. I wouldn't have started if it weren't for you." Maya listened intently as he explained his journey over the past few weeks. The acceptance letter from the magazine, the decision to pursue his dream of becoming an author, and the progress he'd made on his novel. She couldn't help but feel a swell of pride hearing how far he'd come since that rainy night. "That's amazing," she told him honestly. "You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing." The publishing deal changed Daniel's life in ways he never thought possible. Suddenly, he wasn't just a struggling writer trying to make ends meet. He was someone people wanted to hear from. Interviews started pouring in, invitations to speak at events came his way, and strangers began reaching out to share how much his story resonated with them. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he had purpose, not just for himself but for others who needed to see that it was okay to struggle, that things could get better even when they seemed hopeless. But amidst all the excitement, Daniel didn't forget where it all began. Every interview he gave, every article written about him, always circled back to one pivotal moment: the rainy night outside the diner, and the woman who showed him kindness when no one else would. He talked about her often, not just because she'd helped him in a moment of need, but because she reminded him what it meant to be human, to care for someone simply because they're there, without expecting anything in return. One evening, while flipping through channels after a long day at work, Maya froze as she heard Daniel's voice on TV. She turned up the volume, her heart pounding as she watched him sit across from a talk show host, looking polished, yet still so familiar. The host asked him about his journey, and Daniel launched into the story of how Through the Storm came to be. He spoke passionately about his struggles, his love for writing, and then, unexpectedly, he mentioned her. "There was this woman," he said, his voice softening as if recalling a cherished memory. "She saw me when I felt invisible. I was standing outside a diner, soaked to the bone, turned away because of how I looked. She stepped out into the rain, invited me to dinner, and listened to me like I mattered. That act of kindness, it saved me. It gave me hope when I didn't think I had any left." Maya sat there, tears streaming down her face as she listened. She hadn't expected him to bring her into the spotlight like this. Sure, they'd grown close over the months, sharing meals, conversations, and laughter, but she never imagined he'd credit her so openly for his success. What struck her most was how deeply grateful he sounded, not just for the meal or the conversation, but for the simple fact that she'd treated him like a person. After the interview aired, Maya's phone buzzed nonstop. Friends and coworkers texted her, saying they'd seen the segment and recognized her immediately. Even some of the hospital staff teased her gently, calling her their celebrity nurse. At first, Maya felt embarrassed by all the attention. She didn't do what she did for recognition. She did it because it was the right thing to do. But as the messages kept coming, she realized something important. Daniel's words were inspiring others. People were talking about kindness, about seeing beyond appearances, about paying it forward. And somehow, through his success, her small act of compassion had sparked a larger conversation. A few days later, Maya received a package in the mail. There was no note on the outside, just her name and address handwritten in neat block letters. Curious, she tore open the box to find a hardcover copy of Through the Storm, its cover bold and striking. Inside, Daniel had written a heartfelt dedication. "To the angel who saved me when I thought all hope was lost, you taught me the true meaning of grace. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." Tears welled up in her eyes, again as she flipped through the pages. The book wasn't just well written, it was raw, honest, and deeply moving. As she read, she recognized pieces of their shared night woven throughout the narrative. The rain, the diner, the weight of rejection, and the warmth of connection. It was surreal to see herself reflected in his words, immortalized in a story that would touch countless lives. But the surprises didn't end there. Tucked inside the book was an envelope. When Maya opened it, she found a personal letter from Daniel, along with a check for $10,000. Her hands trembled as she read his words. "Dear Maya, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You gave me a second chance when I didn't think I deserved one. This is my way of saying thank you, not just for that night, but for everything you've done since. Please use this however you see fit, knowing it comes from a place of deep, Gratitude. You inspire me every single day, and I hope this inspires you to keep doing what you do best, making the world a better place. With love, Daniel. Maya stared at the check, stunned. She felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, humility, and even guilt. She didn't help Daniel expecting anything in return, and now here he was, giving her something so generous. After sitting with her thoughts for a while, she decided she couldn't keep the money for herself. Instead, she chose to honor Daniel's gesture by paying it forward. She reached out to a local organization that provided scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in healthcare. Growing up, Maya had faced her own challenges, and she knew how life-changing education could be. By donating the money, she hoped to create opportunities for young people who might otherwise struggle to afford school. When the scholarship committee thanked her, she insisted they include Daniel's name alongside hers, explaining that this gift was made possible because of his generosity. When Daniel heard about what Maya had done, he called her right away. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice filled with awe. "That money was for you. And now it's helping others," Maya replied with a smile. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like we're both part of something bigger." They laughed together, marveling at how their lives had intertwined in such unexpected ways. What started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond either of them. They weren't just friends anymore. They were partners in creating change, reminding each other daily that even the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact. As the weeks went by, Daniel continued to rise in fame, his book becoming a bestseller. Yet, despite the accolades and the growing demands on his time, he never lost sight of what mattered most: staying grounded, staying connected, and spreading the message of kindness wherever he went. Meanwhile, Maya returned to her routine at the hospital, finding joy in the little moments of connection with her patients and colleagues. Life carried on as usual, but neither of them would ever forget how fate brought them together, and how their bond proved that humanity's greatest strength lies in lifting each other up. The ripple effect of kindness between Maya and Daniel continued to grow in ways neither of them could have predicted. As Daniel's book climbed the bestseller lists, it sparked conversations far beyond what they had imagined. People from all walks of life reached out to share how his story resonated with them, how it reminded them that even in their darkest moments there was hope. And at the heart of every interview, every article, and every talk Daniel gave, he made sure to highlight one thing: the woman who changed everything for him. Maya, on the other hand, tried to stay grounded despite the growing attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but she understood why Daniel kept bringing her into the narrative. It wasn't about her. It was about the lesson behind their encounter. The idea that a single act of kindness, no matter how small, could set off a chain reaction capable of transforming lives. Still, hearing people call her an angel or a hero felt strange. To her, she had simply done what anyone should do: treat another human being with dignity and care. One day, while scrolling through social media during a rare break at work, Maya stumbled upon a video clip that stopped her in her tracks. It was footage from a community event where Daniel had been invited to speak. Standing on stage under bright lights, he looked confident yet humble, a far cry from the man she'd met outside the diner months earlier. As she listened to him recount their story, her eyes welled up with tears, not because of what he said, but because of the way the audience responded. When Daniel described how Maya stepped into the rain to invite him to dinner, the room erupted in applause. Strangers cheered, some wiping away tears of their own. When he talked about the scholarship fund she created using the money he gifted her, the crowd went silent, absorbing the magnitude of her selflessness. By the end of his speech, people were on their feet, chanting her name as if she were a celebrity. For someone who preferred staying behind the scenes, it was overwhelming and humbling. After the event, Maya received dozens of messages from people inspired by her actions. A young mother wrote to say she'd started volunteering at a local shelter after hearing their story. A college student shared that he'd reached out to a classmate who seemed lonely, remembering Daniel's words about seeing people when they feel invisible. Even co-workers at the hospital approached Maya, telling her how much they admired her courage and compassion. But perhaps the most touching moment came when a letter arrived in the mail from a man named Robert. He explained that he'd hit rock bottom a few years ago, losing his job, his home, and nearly his will to live. One evening, while watching TV alone in a motel room, he caught Daniel's interview where he spoke about Maya's kindness. That night, something shifted inside him. Inspired by their story, Robert decided to turn his life around. He enrolled in a trade school program, worked tirelessly to rebuild himself, and eventually landed a stable job. In his letter, he thanked Maya for giving him hope, even though they'd never met. Reading Robert's words left Maya speechless. She realized then that their story wasn't. As time went on, Daniel's life began to change in ways he never imagined. His book wasn't just a success, it became a movement. People weren't just reading it, they were living it. Book clubs across the country adopted Through the Storm as their monthly pick, sparking discussions about kindness, resilience, and the importance of seeing people beyond their circumstances. Schools started including it in their curriculum, using it as a tool to teach students about empathy and compassion. Even community organizations used his story to inspire volunteers and donors, showing them how small actions could lead to big changes. For Daniel, this newfound platform came with a mix of excitement and responsibility. He traveled to different cities, speaking at schools, libraries, and conferences. At each event, he shared not only his struggles but also the moment that turned his life around, the rainy night when Maya stepped into the storm to help him. He made sure to emphasize that heroes didn't always wear capes. Sometimes they wore scrubs and worked long shifts at hospitals, quietly making the world a better place. Maya, meanwhile, continued her work as a nurse, caring for patients with the same warmth and dedication she'd shown Daniel that night. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she couldn't ignore the impact their story was having. Strangers would approach her at the grocery store or after church services, thanking her for inspiring them to be kinder. Some even told her about specific acts of kindness they'd done because of her example, helping a neighbor carry groceries, paying for someone's coffee, or simply sitting with a friend who needed to talk. One day, while organizing her locker, at the hospital, Maya found another letter tucked inside her bag. It was from a teenager named Alex, who explained that he'd been struggling with bullying at school. Feeling isolated and hopeless, he'd considered dropping out until he heard Daniel's interview, where he talked about Maya's kindness. "Your story reminded me that there are still good people in the world," Alex wrote. "It gave me the strength to keep going. Thank you for being brave enough to care." Reading those words filled Maya with a deep sense of purpose. She realized that helping Daniel hadn't just changed his life, it had created a ripple effect, touching people she'd never meet. It reinforced what she'd always believed, that every person has the power to make a difference no matter how small their action might seem. Despite the growing recognition, both Maya and Daniel remained grounded. They stayed close, meeting regularly to catch up on life and share updates about the impact of their story. During one of these meetings, Daniel surprised Maya with an idea. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "Why don't we team up and do something bigger? Something that combines your passion for healthcare and my mission to spread kindness." Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well," Daniel continued, "you've already helped so many people through your scholarship fund. What if we took it a step further? We could organize a series of workshops or events, maybe even write a book together that focuses on teaching others how to practice kindness in everyday life. Not just random acts, but intentional ones. Imagine the kind of impact we could have working side by side." At first, Maya hesitated. The idea sounded ambitious, and she wasn't sure she was cut out for the public-facing role Daniel envisioned. But the more they talked about it, the more excited she became. Together, they began brainstorming ideas, combining their strengths to create something meaningful. Maya brought her experience in healthcare and community outreach, while Daniel contributed his storytelling skills and ability to connect with diverse audiences. Their first project was a workshop called Kindness in Action, held at a local community center. The goal was simple: to equip attendees with practical tools to practice kindness in their daily lives. They covered topics like active listening, recognizing signs of struggle in others, and finding creative ways to offer support without judgment. To their surprise, the event drew a large crowd, not just locals, but people from neighboring towns who wanted to learn how to make a difference. During the workshop, Maya shared stories from her years as a nurse, highlighting moments when a patient's life was transformed by a simple gesture, a reassuring touch, a few extra minutes spent listening, or a note of encouragement left on a bedside table. Daniel followed up with anecdotes from his own journey, illustrating how Maya's act of kindness had inspired him to pay it forward in countless ways. By the end of the session, participants were buzzing with ideas, eager to put what they'd learned into practice. The success of the workshop encouraged them to expand their efforts. Over the next few months, they organized similar events in other cities, partnering with schools, churches, and nonprofits to reach as many people as possible. Each time they saw the same result: strangers leaving inspired, ready to spread kindness in their own communities. It was proof that their message resonated deeply, cutting across age, background, and circumstance. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of their collaboration was the bond it strengthened between them. Working together allowed Maya and Daniel to see new sides of each other. Maya admired Daniel's creativity and determination, while Daniel marveled at Maya's wisdom and unwavering commitment to helping others. Their friendship evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision for a kinder world. One evening, after wrapping up a particularly successful event, they sat together outside the venue, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply enjoy the quiet moment. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you ever think about how crazy this all is?" he asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass everything: their journey, the lives they'd touched, the unexpected twists fate had thrown their way. Maya smiled softly. "All the time," she admitted. "But I think that's the beauty of it. Life doesn't always make sense, but when you choose to show up for someone, even in the smallest way, it can set off a chain reaction you'd never expect." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know, I used to think success meant achieving my dreams on my own. But now I realize it's about connection, about lifting each other up and remembering that none of us gets through this alone." Maya reached over and patted his hand. "That's exactly why our story matters, because it reminds people that they're part of something bigger. That even in a world that often feels divided, there's still room for kindness, and that makes all the difference." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, they sat in companionable silence, reflecting on how far they'd come. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they were certain of one thing: as long as they kept choosing kindness, they'd continue to inspire others to do the same. And in doing so, they'd leave behind a legacy far greater than either of them could have imagined. As the months rolled on, Maya and Daniel's partnership grew stronger, both personally and professionally. Their workshops, which started as small gatherings in community centers, began to attract larger crowds. Word spread quickly about their unique approach to teaching kindness, not just as a concept, but as something actionable, tangible, and deeply human. People weren't just attending these events. They were leaving transformed, armed with practical tools to make a difference in their own lives and the lives of others. One day, while reviewing feedback from a recent workshop, Maya stumbled upon a comment that made her pause. A participant had written, "This wasn't just a session. It felt like therapy for my soul. I've been so focused on surviving that I forgot how important it is to connect with others. Thank you for reminding me of the power of compassion." Reading those words brought tears to Maya's eyes. She realized then that what they were doing was more than education or inspiration. It was healing. They were giving people permission to care, to slow down, and to see the humanity in everyone around them. Encouraged by the positive response, Daniel suggested taking their message even further, What if we wrote a book together? He asked, one evening over coffee. Not just about our story, but about the lessons we've learned along the way, how to practice kindness intentionally, how to navigate tough times without losing hope, and how to build connections that truly matter. Maya hesitated at first. Writing a book sounded daunting, especially since she'd never considered herself a writer. But Daniel reassured her. You don't have to be perfect, he said. Just be honest. Your voice matters because it comes from real experience. From years of caring for people when they're at their most vulnerable. That's something no one else can replicate. With his encouragement, Maya agreed to give it a try. Over the next several months, they worked tirelessly on the project, meeting regularly to brainstorm ideas, draft chapters, and refine their message. The process wasn't always easy. There were late nights spent debating the best way to explain complex emotions, moments of frustration when words didn't flow as smoothly as they'd hoped, and times dubio. As the years passed, Maya and Daniel's partnership became a beacon of hope for countless people. Their workshops, books, and public appearances had ignited a movement that seemed to grow bigger with each passing day. Yet despite their growing
influence, they never lost sight of what truly mattered. The everyday acts of kindness that could transform lives in ways no grand gesture ever could. One chilly winter morning, Maya arrived at the hospital to find an envelope waiting for her.
At the front desk. It was plain, unmarked except for her name written neatly in blue ink. Curious, she opened it during a quiet moment between patient visits. Inside was a handwritten letter from a woman named Lisa, who explained that she'd attended one of their workshops months earlier. At the time, Lisa had been struggling. Her marriage was falling apart, her job felt meaningless, and she'd begun to question whether anyone cared about her anymore. I'll never forget the exercise you led, Lisa wrote. You asked us to write down 3 things we appreciated about someone in our lives and share them aloud. I chose my husband, even though we hadn't spoken kindly to each other in weeks. That night, I told him what I'd written, and it changed everything. We started talking again, really listening to each other. Now we're working on rebuilding our relationship. Thank you for teaching me that kindness begins at home. Maya read the letter twice, her chest swelling with emotion. She thought about how often people overlooked the power of small gestures, how a few kind words or a moment of vulnerability could mend broken relationships and restore faith in humanity. This wasn't just Lisa's story. It was proof that the ripple effect of kindness extended far beyond what anyone could see. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to pour his heart into his writing. His second novel, inspired by the stories he'd heard through their work together, became another bestseller. Critics praised its raw honesty and ability to capture the complexities of human connection. But for Daniel, the real reward came in the letters he received from readers, people who said his words gave them courage to face their own storms, to believe in the possibility of brighter days ahead. One such letter stood out among the rest. It came from a man named Tom, who described himself as a recovering addict trying to rebuild my life. He explained that he'd stumbled upon Daniel's first book while staying at a rehabilitation center. The story of resilience and compassion resonated deeply with him, reminding him that redemption was possible. When Tom finished reading, he decided to reach out to an old friend he'd hurt during his darkest days. To his surprise, the friend forgave him, and they began repairing their fractured bond. Your book didn't just change my life, it saved it, Tom wrote. And now, because of your story, I've learned to forgive myself and start over. Thank you for showing me that everyone deserves a second chance. Reading these words filled Daniel with a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that storytelling wasn't just about entertaining or inspiring. It was about creating space for people to heal, to reflect, and to find meaning in their struggles. Each letter he received reinforced the idea that their mission wasn't just about spreading kindness. It was about fostering connection and understanding in a world that often felt divided. Despite their successes, Maya and Daniel faced challenges, too. There were days when the weight of expectations felt overwhelming, when self-doubt crept in and whispered cruel reminders of their imperfections. But whenever doubt threatened to take hold, they turned to each other for support. They reminded, themselves and each other, that they weren't doing this for recognition or validation. They were doing it because they believed in the power of kindness to heal wounds, bridge divides, and rewrite destinies. Their friendship deepened with every challenge they navigated together. They celebrated milestones, both personal and professional, with joy and humility. When Maya earned an award for her contributions to community healthcare, Daniel cheered louder than anyone in the audience. And when Daniel's second book won a prestigious literary prize, Maya stood beside him at the ceremony, beaming with pride. But perhaps the most rewarding moments came when they least expected them. One spring afternoon, while volunteering at a local shelter, Maya noticed a familiar face among the volunteers. A young woman named Alex, whom she'd met years earlier during a particularly tough shift at the hospital. Back then, Alex had been a teenager battling depression, unsure if she had a future worth fighting for. Maya had taken extra time to listen to her, offering words of encouragement and connecting her with resources to help her heal. Now, standing before her in scrubs identical to her own, Alex introduced herself as a nursing student completing her clinical rotation at the shelter. "I wouldn't be here without you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You showed me that caring for others could be a career and a calling. I want to be like you someday." Maya hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her. In that moment, she saw the full circle of impact, the way one act of compassion could inspire someone to pay it forward, creating a legacy of care and connection that spanned generations. Daniel experienced similar moments of awe. During a book signing event, a middle-aged man approached him, clutching a worn copy of Through the Storm. "This book saved my son's life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He was struggling with anxiety and depression, convinced he was alone in his pain. Reading your story gave him hope. Now he's thriving. He even started volunteering at a youth center to help kids going through the same thing. Daniel shook the man's hand, overwhelmed by the realization that his words had traveled farther than he'd ever imagined. These encounters reminded him why he kept writing. Not for fame or fortune, but to remind people that they mattered, that their struggles were valid, and that there was always a reason to keep going. As their journey continued, Maya and Daniel found themselves reflecting more often on the lessons they'd learned along the way. They realized that kindness wasn't just an action, it was a mindset, a way of seeing the world and the people in it. It required patience, empathy, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability. Most importantly, it demanded persistence, the belief that even in a world filled with pain and uncertainty, love and compassion could prevail. One evening, after wrapping up another successful workshop, they sat together on a park bench, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand under the fading sunlight. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply soak in the beauty of the moment. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "You know," she said softly, "when I stepped outside that diner all those years ago, I had no idea where it would lead. I just knew I couldn't walk away." Daniel smiled, nodding in agreement. "And look where it's brought us. Sometimes I think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't crossed paths that night. But then I realize, maybe it wasn't random. Maybe we were meant to meet, to remind each other and everyone else that kindness isn't just something we do. It's who we are." Maya leaned back, gazing at the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "It's funny, isn't it? How one small choice can change so much." "It's not funny," Daniel replied, his tone serious yet warm. "It's powerful, and that's why we keep going, to show people that they have that same power within them." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, they sat in companionable silence, grateful for the path they'd traveled together. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they were certain of one thing. As long as they kept choosing kindness, they'd continue to inspire others to do the same, and in doing so, they'd leave behind a legacy far greater than either of them could have dreamed, a testament to the enduring power of compassion to heal, unite, and transform the world. Years had passed since that rainy night outside the diner. But its impact lingered in ways neither Maya nor Daniel could have ever predicted. What began as a simple act of compassion had grown into something extraordinary, a movement that touched lives across cities, states, and even countries. People from all walks of life were inspired to take action, to see others with fresh eyes, and to believe in the power of small gestures to create big change. One crisp autumn evening, Maya and Daniel stood side by side on stage at a charity gala hosted in honor of Daniel's literary achievements. The room buzzed with energy. Hundreds of guests dressed in their finest, sipping champagne and chatting animatedly about the difference kindness could make in the world. A massive screen behind them displayed images from their journey, the workshops they'd led, the communities they'd served, and the faces of those whose lives had been transformed because of their efforts. As the host introduced them, the audience erupted into applause. Maya smiled shyly, unused to being the center of attention, while Daniel waved warmly, soaking in the moment. When it was their turn to speak, Daniel stepped up to the microphone first. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "But most important,